So thanks everybody for coming to the Advice and Guidance Tools webinar. If everybody could go on mute, but feel free to ask questions in the chat. We'll try to answer them at the end, but actually if we miss any out, usually we send a follow-up email with the presentation as well as answers to questions. So just to clarify, today I'm actually going through broadly what advice and guidance tools there are that are available to you and where to find them, but in particular about Vantage Rego and what that is and how you can set it up on your PCs if you haven't already, and also how to actually use it. There are other aspects of Vantage Rego which I don't necessarily think are that relevant for today's discussion around waiting times from the consultants, but feel free to add those comments in if you like, and all the feedback that comes from today we will also be passing to Vantage and to London North West Hospital Trusts, so that they know what the landscape is on the ground around waiting times. Okay, so great. So without further ado, I'll just we'll start the presentation. Let me know if this shows up okay. Hopefully everybody can see this. So what we will cover are essentially a broad overview of the advice and guidance sources that are available to us as clinicians. I'm going to walk you through how to use Vantage Rego in order to submit advice and guidance requests. And one of the reasons I'm doing this sort of quite didactically is and doing essentially a walkthrough is because I'm getting huge amounts of queries around how do you use it and how do you install it. And the guides that are already available are probably not the best. So this will hopefully help. And then finally, if we have time, just a brief overview of the ERS advice and guidance tool in case any of you would like to use that method as well. So what advice and guidance sources have we got available to us? Well, there's quite a number actually, and it's quite good to know where to find them. And thankfully, there is a collated list, which I'll show you in a minute. So there are advice and guidance sources via email, and you may have previously used the Imperial email advice lines, which have been traditionally available to us on a number of specialties for years. Sadly, they've now more or less officially stopped since the start of COVID, as the consultants in Imperial mostly don't feel that they have time to answer individual emails as well as cover the ERS advice and guidance requests. So officially they finished. They're still on the Imperial website, as I believe, but if you submit a request for email advice from Imperial, you may or may not get a response. There are, though, other email sources, which I'll show you in a minute. ERS, so ERS has an advice and guidance element to it, and it works slightly differently to the normal way you submit a referral, and I'll try and show you that at the end. There's telephone, and again in the document that I'll show you in a minute, there are some really useful telephone numbers of particular services that you can access quite readily on the phone. One example is the Chelsea and Westminster Burns unit for adults and children. They're really very easily accessible, in my experience, on the phone, and it's worth having those sets of resources in your on your desktop perhaps, and they're updated really frequently. So I'll show you where to download the list from. There's Vantage Rego, which is actually the main topic of discussion today. And Vantage are a company, an IT-based platform provider. Rego is the tool that they've named in order to facilitate advice and guidance requests by us in primary care to hospital consultants in London North West Hospital Trust. So London North West is really the main hospital trust that provides the consultants for this purpose. So that's Ealing, Central Mid, and Northwick Park. There's other sources, such as special cases, I call them, where they're not really listed anywhere. And I try to keep a sort of separate list, and eventually we do add them to the overall list as published on the Northwest London website. But I found this one the other day, which is an acute oncology clinic run in Chelsea and Westminster. These patients, this clinic receives patient referrals for patients you're actually quite worried about, but they don't fulfill 2-week wait criteria, and you don't particularly want to send a 2-week wait referral ticking the clinical suspicion box or clinical concerns box. But you still want the patient seen really quickly. So they will see patients within a week or two, and all they require is an email referral to this nhs.net email address with details, and if you could include blood results and any workup you've done already. They've been superb in my experience. They've really helped me out with quite a few patients. Obviously, the downside here is I don't want necessarily a barrage of referrals to them as of this webinar, but obviously if you think a referral is appropriate, do email them, and they're excellent. Community services. So you probably all know our community cardiology service provides advice and guidance either pre-referral or instead of a referral, or if you want help with ECG interpretations. So that's readily available, and a number of our community services do the same. Okay, so let's move on. So excuse me, my throat may give up at some point, in which case I might need a few seconds break, but I'll let you know. So this is the excuse me, the Northwest London website. This is actually not a very well utilized resource, but this website has a huge array of resources for professionals. And I've put the web URL there in case colleagues don't know. So there's a section here for professionals. So if you click on that or hover over it, you'll find a whole array of different resources that are available to us and that are updated regularly. And the one that we're really looking for is the referral guidelines and clinical documents. That's very useful. So when you click in that, you will be presented with a whole list of guideline documents, but in that list there is also an advice and guidance directory. So I'd really encourage you to periodically download this and share it within the clinician group in your practices. So just to show you, I mean, I'm not going to show you the whole document, but the general idea of the document is that it lists every one of our local trusts at the top, and then on the side it's essentially a manually created directory with different specialties and services, and for each of the trusts it tells you how you contact that particular specialty or how you submit an advice and guidance request. And with some of them, as we said, you'll need to phone them or you can email them. Others will be via ERS. Others will be recommended to be via Vantage Rego. And so you have an instant, almost like a mini dashboard within your practice of where you can get advice from, depending on which hospital or group of hospitals you want to approach. So definitely would encourage you to download this, and it's updated really regularly. So I would say monthly, get a fresh copy, and I keep this on my desktop. Okay, so moving on to Vantage Rego. So Vantage Rego, for those of you who don't know, is a platform that was rapidly deployed following the start of the COVID pandemic to provide advice and guidance to clinicians who might not necessarily need to refer, want advice before referring patients as to what to do. And the reason we went, not just us in Ealing, but a number of boroughs in Northwest London went for this, is because London Northwest traditionally has really not provided us with advice and guidance in any structured way. It's been really difficult to contact specialists within Norfolk Park or Central Middlesex or Ealing unless you happen to know their individual email addresses, and even then you might email and then never get a response back. So it wasn't very structured. So given that it was already in use by a number of CCGs in Northwest London, we felt we shouldn't really miss out, and the company was providing the initial service for free. So we piggybacked onto that rollout. So the tool itself, called Rego, is actually not a tool that's been designed for advice and guidance, but it's been adapted to do that. It was actually for internal communication between consultants and departments on referrals that they've received. So it isn't without its flaws because it's had to be rapidly adapted to our needs. And the company are constantly receiving feedback and developing it. So any feedback you have, either directly send it to Vantage via the dashboard, which I'll show you later, or you can let me know and I can liaise with them. I'm constantly liaising and giving feedback on this. Excuse me. So as I said, this has been agreed across Northwest London for the free trial, but that ended, I think, in October. And as of October, we now have another year of this tool. And there are some potentially interesting developments, which I'll mention a bit later, that might hopefully make functionality even better. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm not sure if I'm still on the mic. Hopefully you can. Okay, so moving on. So how do you install and use Vantage Rego? Again, apologies if my voice becomes croaky. I've been talking non-stop today. So first thing to do is check whether you've already installed it, or someone has already installed this on your PC. The IT team tried to remotely install Rego on most, if not all, the PCs that they had access to within the Ealing GP practice network. But some were off, or they just didn't accept the remote installation file. So how do you do it if you've not done it? Well, first of all, check whether or not this icon exists on your desktop. So this icon here, if you have this, then it is installed and it should be working, and you shouldn't need to reinstall it. The only time you might need to reinstall it is if, I'll mention this later, if you find that when you launch the template for Rego advice and guidance, that the website dashboard doesn't come up. But if the installation has been properly set up, it should work. So if that exists, don't touch it and basically follow the steps. So if you need to install Rego, follow this website, which is actually a resource site by Vantage. This, when you click it, it'll take you to a very simple site that basically has a number of guides on how to use Rego, but also on an installation help web link. So that's the one highlighted here. So if you click that, and then when you go into that link, it'll open a document, a sort of embedded PDF. And what you do is essentially follow the instructions. So the most important thing you've got to do is close any Excel or Word application that you may have open, but have System 1 or EMIS, if you use EMIS, open and on at the time that you're doing the installation. Because if you don't do these things, then it will not work properly with your clinical system. And if you don't shut down Word, it may actually cause a malfunction with how the automatic launch of the Rego site comes up when you launch the template on System 1. So click the blue link in that embedded document, and that will automatically start the download of the installation file. And then you run it, and basically that's it installed. So again, that's just the same document, but just a little bit lower down. So how do you use Rego? And that's a very common question. Even though it may seem easy on the guides, there's a number of things that I think would be useful just to go through. So if you go onto your System 1 clinical system, the agreed way of actually launching Rego is via auto consultation. Okay, so if you click on auto consultation, you will come up with the usual list. Now Rego is actually listed in a couple of locations here, but I tend to use the help and guidance option, and then you click on Rego advice and guidance. And when you do that, you'll get this window, which basically is a specific template launcher. So you would tick the box so that you would code in the clinical record that a piece of advice and guidance has been requested, and then basically click on the launch advice and guidance button. Now, when you do that, what will happen is you'll get a pro forma, a template that will launch, and this template will pre-populate with a number of things. Now, the content of the template is a fairly standard set of data that we tend to input into most of our referral templates. The downside with this, and I've had a discussion with some colleagues about this already, and I've also fed it back to Rego, is that if you modify this document, it actually does not make any difference to what Rego Vantage actually receives at the other end and what the consultant will see. So whilst the document can be edited on your end currently, and it will save in a clinical record as per how you've modified it, the consultant specialist that will get it at the other end will basically get all these fields which are pre-populated from your clinical record. Now, issues with that may be that there may be sensitive information that you might not want the consultants to receive. And so I've been in discussion with Rego around how we can actually modify this going forward. And unfortunately, System 1 is a bit of a clunky system with regard to enabling you to choose what elements go into a template before you launch it. But there may be a way, and they're currently developing it, and I'm assured that within a month or so, they'll be able to test this out. So bear with us. So for now, be aware that when this launches, the info within it will go to the consultant if you submit that advice and guidance request. So if you really feel that there is some sensitive info there that should not be shared, then do not request advice and guidance for that patient. Okay, so now what happens when you, so let's go back, the template will launch. Essentially, you don't need to really do anything with this except save it if you're happy with the content. At the same time as this template launches, a web browser will launch if the installation has happened correctly on your system. And the web browser is usually Internet Explorer, and it takes you directly into the Rego website. You don't have to log in, okay? It automatically does this for you. So if you're coming up with a login page, something has gone wrong, okay? It has not launched properly from within System 1. And what I would then do is close it down and go back and try and do the launch again. Sometimes, depending on different computers and their RAM capabilities and their cache in their browsers, the actual automatic launch of the browser may fail. And in that scenario, really the best thing you can do is just restart System 1 initially and see if it works. And if not, just restart the PC. And most of the time that fixes any issues with automatic launching of browsers. But if it still doesn't work, then it means your installation is faulty and the program needs to be reinstalled. If you're not sure how to do that, let me know. But essentially, you do it through Windows 10, through the add remove applications method, and then reinstall Rego with the method I've shown you earlier. Okay, so this is the page you come up with, and you then select the user. So whichever doctor or nurse practitioner is using it, they pick their name and click it. And then after that, you will get a prompt around which specialty you want to pick. And there are a number of specialties to choose from. So pick your specialty, and then once you've picked, for that particular specialty, a number of conditions usually shows up underneath. Excuse me. So you don't have to tick any specific condition. You can leave that option unchecked and go straight down to the narrative, which is actually the advice and guidance narrative. So this is essentially what you want to ask the consultant, and try to include as much detail as possible. Obviously, I tend to do a copy and paste of consultations, but if you see down here, it actually also has the option of including recent consultations, but I found that this doesn't always work. So it's a bit hit and miss. So sometimes you do have to just simply copy and paste a consultation from System 1. And sadly, as we all know, it doesn't actually integrate with System 1 directly on a tab journal level. But that again is something that Vantage is working on, and integration is I'm told a month or two away. So our ability to actually import to have a set of checkboxes which correspond to consultations should be available in the near future. If you've got images or documents or letters that you want to update, there's also an option to do that through this little button here. And again, that's not directly interoperable with System 1, so you would potentially have to save whatever document or picture you want to attach to another folder on your hard drive, and then upload it from that location onto this. So once you've done that and you've filled in the narrative and you've uploaded what you've needed to upload and you've included the consultations you need, next step is to send it. So you don't have to save the advice and guidance request unless you want to, unless you've not finished. So you can save it and then return back to the dashboard to complete it. But if you're ready, you simply press send, and that will send the request to that specific department, ready for the consultant to view. This preview CRI button is basically that template that we saw on System 1. If you click it, it'll launch that template content as a pop-up window, just so that you can see what the consultant will be seeing at the other end. Okay, so moving on. So you've sent your advice and guidance request, and you're then waiting. What do you do next? So how do you view your referral dashboard? Surprisingly, this has been a really common question, and I think the initial training tools perhaps didn't really focus on this enough. So this is essentially the website that you have to go on. You need to have a secure connection to view this. Okay, so I've had several colleagues saying, I've tried it, it doesn't work, I can't get onto it. And that's because they're not actually on a secure network. They're not either at their practice, or they have not logged on using an HSCN connection from home. You really need that because you're dealing with patient identifiable information. So this is a very secure site. Your practice should have received the details as to how to log on to this. And it's normally a generic practice-wide login. So if you didn't receive login details for your dashboard, please do email Vantage support, and they will reset you and share your login details with you. Okay, so next, once you've clicked on that link to go into your dashboard, essentially you will be presented with a pretty basic dashboard, and this is actually where you really begin to see that this tool wasn't really designed to do this to begin with. So they've just had to adapt it for the use of advice and guidance. So you've got a number of tabs at the top. You've got a requiring action tab, a pending tab, an action tab, and a discharge tab. Those are the main ones. Archives are advice and guidance requests that you've already dealt with, and they've been saved in the system. And if you've got a specific UBRN or patient name or date of birth, or any specific patient you're searching for, you can actually put their name and details on this if your list is, for example, really big and you're trying to navigate through it. So on the pending, on the requiring action tab, so just to give you an example, what that means essentially is that you've sent in your request, your advice and guidance request to the consultant, and the consultant has responded, okay? And that response needs to be read, and an action needs to be taken to allow the consultant to know that you've done something with it. Okay, so if you click on that particular, I've grayed this out obviously because of patient identifiable data, but if you click that particular patient's details on the list, it'll then take you to the next page, which is the area where you'll see your initial advice request on the left side, but then the consultant's response on the right side, which is under the advice heading. Okay, so you've got a sent heading, which tells you where it went and which consultant from which hospital responded. Although it says Ealing Hospital here, actually the consultant that responded was from Northwick Park. And in this particular case, the consultant says, I mean, we've not read the actual advice request, but the consultant says, I would refer this patient directly to Nick Panay's clinic at Chelsea and Westminster, as they probably have the most expert team nationally for PMS. Best wishes, Rufus Cartwright. Now, to clarify some of the misconceptions here, so many colleagues have actually emailed me saying, Oh, well, the consultant said that they booked the patient directly into their clinic after my advice and guidance request. Now, they may have done that, and that is possible, but actually that is not the agreed pathway, and there isn't supposed to be a mechanism for the consultant to do that yet. Although I know for us it will make life a lot easier. So if a consultant says, actually, I think we need to see this patient, let me book them in myself, that would be great for us. But the system currently doesn't support it because it still requires a GP referral for the hospital to be paid. Now, the developments that are going on the Vantage Rego platform are that in the coming months, if this is agreed, if the next phase of development is agreed, if a consultant suggests that a referral is needed to, for example, their department, you'll have another button there which integrates directly with System 1, which basically launches the ERS window and pre-populates everything you need within ERS, including the referral letter and including the advice request and the initial template and the response of the consultant. So it becomes an automatic process to actually then just book the patient. We don't have that yet, as I say, a new tool, but that's the ambition. You will have a refer on button on here on the right side, which will enable you to do that. Well, that's the idea. What's currently being worked out is the money that this will cost, because this is a development that the company are having to invest in, and they will need to be assured that the system is able to fund that development. So watch this space. So once you've read your advice and guidance, what you then do, what do you do? I mean, there's two options actually. One is you can accept and complete this particular episode, in which case, if you do that, then if we go back to the previous slide, then that particular patient will then come under the action tab, so they will disappear from the requiring action tab, and they will go to the actioned tab. But the alternative is you might feel actually you want to ask another question. So rather than sending another advice and guidance request, you can just simply click the button here on the left, which will in theory allow a two-way conversation with the consultant, and you can then go on and submit your subsequent question. Okay, so just to show you the other tabs, so the pending tab is essentially a list of requests where you have not received yet any advice and guidance request, or where in rare circumstances, as I mentioned earlier, the consultant may have actually booked the patient into a clinic, and I had to double check this. Our patient was booked directly by a consultant, but as I said, it's not the norm yet, and it's not something we should expect the consultants to do. That if they do it, they're doing it either because they're being nice or because they're worried about the history you've given and the patient. So there are those types of reasons, but technically it's not the agreed pathway yet. And then the action tab, as we said earlier, which is everything you've picked off that list of requiring action, then will end up in here. And you can see some of the waiting times here that also pop up. I'm not going to dwell on those very much, but hematology is long. But actually, your waiting time, the waiting time you see here, or the time, this is the days that have passed since referral. So this isn't accurate because these are the actioned requests. So to see a proper waiting time for that particular advice and guidance request, you really need to go to the pending tab. That is the tab that will tell you how long a patient has actually waited prior to advice being given. This is basically the days that have passed since referral, and the advice and guidance request may have been sent to you the next day. So it's not that relevant. Okay, so what about practice and PCN and CCG reporting of all this referral data? So I'm not going to show you this in the interest of time, and also probably because it's not that interesting to most of you, but there is a back-end reporting tool that Vantage have created, which is actually quite useful, and I'm able to, from a CCG point of view, see what the average waiting time is for all the different specialties. And as you might have guessed, dermatology is very long, to the tune of about 3 to 4 weeks at the moment, although they're supposed to be getting slightly better. The best specialty so far is ENT, with a turnaround time of about a day or two in most cases. But the dashboard that Vantage provide is able to give PCN level reporting on referral, advice and guidance requests, and the types of problems that clinicians are asking about, and the types of outcomes that then happen for patients. So the proportion of those requests that then need onward booking, the proportion that are able to then just be by primary care without needing referral elsewhere, the proportion that might need investigations, etc. So some of it is quite useful data, and it can be practice level, PCN or CCG, and we're in discussions currently with Vantage around how to actually get some meaningful reports out to you as practices on your own advice requests, and perhaps then later as a PCN. And that will help us identify any problems with any specific pathways, and also help us work out what targeted, what educational events we need to perhaps target in order to, if we're getting really common advice requests on specific areas, it'll highlight educational needs for us. So it's a useful tool. So just before I go on to ERS, are there any questions so far before I go on to the next bit? Sorry, I haven't been looking at the chat because I don't think there's many questions on the chat anyway, but there's a couple of questions. One is, it doesn't do it automatically for us, Alex. We have to open the browser. So Pawan, that means your installation has probably gone wrong somewhere, and I would reinstall Rego if that's the case. Unless you are happy just to open the dashboard and manually sign in every time. So that's one. And then another is problems with Rego referrals, whereby it's showing that it has been sent to the hospital, but when we contact the hospital, they are saying they have not. I contacted the Rego live chat line, was advised to raise this over with our contract manager. In the end, we had to send the referral through ERS, which was a lot of time wasted. In future, what can be done and how do we contact the contracts manager? So that's a very good point, and actually that relates to what I was saying earlier. Do not ever assume the consultant has booked the patient into their clinic. And I've raised this, and I know the comms on this is clunky, and I've asked the Rego team to reword the outcome of an advice request so that it's clearer what the consultant has done. But a lot of the consultants will say referred on, and that's how it will come on your dashboards. But actually, what they mean is they want you to refer the patient, and they've not done it, except in those very rare cases where, as I said, we found that the patient had been referred. So my suggestion is to so I check with the department, or our admin team check with the department if a referral has been received. I know that a bit of extra time until the new comms comes out on the Rego platform. But that way we can clarify if the referral has actually been made. And I tend to just assume it hasn't, and I just do the referral myself, and I contact the patient to ask where they might want to be referred. So I completely empathize with your issue, but it will get better once the comms are improved on the actual Rego platform. So a couple more questions. I have emailed IT. So Pawan, with this, you should be able to do it yourself without IT actually reinstalling it.
And the issue is, in the recent email I received, it said if you're Windows 10, you can't do for yourself. And I think we did have this installed previously, but I think when we had the Windows refresh, that team did not reinstall Rego for us. And there is no link for us to use for Windows 10, so that's why I just emailed IT, because they had to push, I think, the system for us to accept it. Thank you.
You're quite right that some Windows 10 installations in Ealing Practices don't allow installation of new programs and new applications. Others do, strangely, and I don't know if Shankar knows why there is a disparity between some PCs being able to do this and some not. But in those which are locked and you need admin rights, yes, the only thing you can do is get IT to reinstall it for you. And in the meantime, you can use the dashboard manually to submit an advice request through that. What is the current waiting time from Sangeeta? So very variable, Sangeeta. So the waiting time for most specialties is up to about a week, with ENT being best. And the worst is 3 to 4 weeks, which is dermatology. And I've actually fed this back to the trust, and there's a chap called Chris Robbins who manages their planned care clinics and departments, and he's very familiar with the waiting times, and he's doing his best to try and get every department to provide more staff to actually answer queries, because you begin to lose faith in a service if you've waited 3 or 4 weeks and then nothing happens. You may end up just writing a referral anyway because you've waited so long, and really we don't want that. And sadly, dermatology have just been inundated, and they've had a lot of staff shortages, I hear, as well. Surinder says, I have difficulty with the send button not showing up. That I have seen that actually as well, Surinder, and I had to reinstall it on a computer where this happened. What I found was that if the default launch browser is Internet Explorer, it works. But if usually works anyway. If it's another browser like Chrome, it doesn't work, or the button just doesn't show up. And that, if you're having difficulties with that, again, it might be an IT help desk issue in terms of reinstallation, and they'll need to tweak some settings around the default browser that launches, because different browsers are slightly different in terms of how they handle these automatic launch requests from the system. You might have noticed even in your practice, actually, when you do an ERS referral, it doesn't launch Chrome, it launches Internet Explorer, because ERS just doesn't work on Chrome. It works on Internet Explorer, and there's different complex reasons behind that. So a couple more. Let me know, Shankar and Finn, if I've missed any. What's the easiest way to save the response from Rego into S1? So the easiest way I found is if you click on the PDF option, it converts it to a PDF, which includes the advice request and the response. And I tend to email that to our admin team to workflow it into the system. I know it's clunky, but the interoperability element I mentioned is going to also enable that to be automatically saved into the record by just clicking a button, in a similar way to how AccuRx allows us to save patient responses and images and so on. Okay, so I'll probably just carry on with the ERS bits, and then if there's other questions, we can pick them up over email, if that's okay. This should be short though. So are you still able to see my screen, my presentation screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So with ERS advice and guidance, I know a lot of practices are not using this, but there are very legitimate and valid reasons why you may need to use ERS advice and guidance, and that is because you then open it up to all providers in the country potentially, and there are some providers that are super specialist. So, for example, some lipid clinics are highly specialist, and you may need advice and guidance from them. They're based only in 1 or 2 sites in London, and so you won't be able to fulfill all your advice and guidance needs from Rego and from even necessarily the document I shared, which you can download from the Northwest London website earlier. So you may have to resort to this. It is clunky, as I'm sure many of you know. I don't know how many clinicians actually use ERS themselves, or whether your admin teams are doing it, but I happen to use it myself, and I personally think it's a terrible platform. It really, I'm staggered that so many years after launch, it's still so hard to use, and it needs a major overhaul. And that's no different for the advice and guidance element. Theoretically, excuse me, it does allow a two-way discussion with the receiving consultant, and I'll show you where you do this. You do need to keep on top of your work lists, and I find that if you're in a practice where your admin team are really hot on looking at your work list, which they should be, and they are very reliable at sending you any responses from providers and from consultants, then I would use it. If though there is a high chance that you might miss the advice because no one's looking at it, or the admin team might be a bit haphazard at sending these on, I'd suggest do this yourself. Get a login for your ERS work list and just do it yourself. In fact, you don't even need a login. If you're logged on an HSCN connection, all you need is the URL, and it'll automatically take you. And if you've logged in with your smart card, all you do is you choose your role within your smart card and you're logged on. So don't rely on your admin team unless they're super efficient at sending you the responses. Otherwise, look at the work list yourself. Waiting times are hugely variable for receiving advice back via ERS. I've experienced ludicrously, one consultant from Royal Free came back to me after 3 months on a really fairly simple question, but by that stage I'd already referred the patient to another site. So most of the time though, they tend to be quite quick, especially since COVID, because more of the consultants are working remotely, and they've introduced looking into advice requests into a more routine part of their working week. So I'm not sure how well you can see this, but I've just taken some screenshots from my own ERS web browser at the practice. So essentially, very simple. What you do is, if you see the highlighted area here, you've got a drop-down menu, and it has 2 options. One is referral, the other is advice. So if you want advice, you click advice, okay? So going forward to the next slide, Oh, sorry, before I show you this bit. So the rest of it is exactly the same. So once you've picked advice, it'll still give you an option of routine, urgent, and 2-week wait, even though really, theoretically, you probably shouldn't be using this for 2-week wait referrals, but you might legitimately have a question about a 2-week wait pathway. So that's why I think the NHS digital team have left that in. And some services do provide a 2-week wait advice service. So it's there for a reason. So depending on the urgency, you pick the appropriate priority here. And then, as usual, pick the specialty, pick the clinic type. But my suggestion would be don't pick a clinic type. If you leave it as not otherwise specified, you'll get the most populated list of and the widest variety of advice services that there are. If you want to obviously use the geography limiter, you can. So you could actually use a limitation of the provider being within a certain amount of miles from the address, etc., etc. But I tend to leave these things blank, and then I just pick from the list. So the list will come up. I've picked dermatology here, and as you can see, there are a whole host of advice services for dermatology. But actually, interestingly, not many within Northwest London. So you've got West Mid and Chelsea and Westminster, and then pretty much everything else is outside of Northwest London. So your mileage will vary on this depending on the specialty. And there's nothing stopping you from getting advice, for example, from Royal Free Dermatology. But read carefully what it says on the actual description, okay? So some of them will say advice only. Some will say it's a referral assessment service, which actually has been misclassified as a sort of triaging service. So you often find on ERS that triage services and advice services are listed in a dual fashion. And you may not get advice back if you submit a request to one of those. So I tend to look for ones that actually say advice, and that's a pretty good sign that they will get back to you with actual proper advice. But do click on it and also read the narrative of what it describes, because it'll tell you in more detail. Okay, so you've sent an ERS, advice request. What do you do next? So this is where what I was talking about with the work lists is really important. So if you don't know the URL, that's it. Okay, so you can save it somewhere, put it on your favorites in Explorer, and when you're in the practice or you're logged on via your smart card at home, through an HSCN connection, just go on it, and it should work if your computer's been set up properly. Some Explorers don't work, and it becomes a bit of a nightmare to sort them out, but IT can. They do need to reinstall certain elements and ActiveX controls. I won't bore you with any of that, but there are reasons why your ERS web link might not work, especially outside the practice when you're working remotely. And if that happens, you do need to let IT know. But when you launch it, instead of going to patient, which is where the previous section was, where we were actually submitting the referral, the advice and guidance request, you go onto work lists. Okay, and here there's another drop-down menu, and what you need to pick is the advice and guidance option, which is the very bottom one. Okay, so you can see that there on the bottom. So those the advice and guidance requests that you've sent in will come under that particular list. So not the top one, which is the usual one, or the top two are the usual ones that your admin teams will look at, where the service has replied saying, you know, it's either inappropriate or you need to do something else, or we need a referral letter, or we need a photo that you haven't attached, or whatever. But those are not the ones. The top 3 options will not contain your advice and guidance response. It'll be the bottom one. So you pick that, and then as usual, this area, which is actually blanked out partly by the box, is the clinician responsible. So you can see it on the previous slide. You pick the clinician responsible, so yourself, and you should see all your advice and guidance requests listed. So I haven't put them up, my personal ones up, because I didn't have time, but you'll get a list here in the usual way, and you can click on each one and read what the service and the consultant has said. And actually, in theory, there should be an option within those to respond back to the consultant. Okay, so that's it in terms of what I wanted to cover. I know it was quite a quick run through and probably a little bit didactic and sort of procedural, but I felt I needed to do that based on the questions that have been coming in. So hopefully that was useful. Are there any other questions, Finn or Shankar, that are pressing that I've missed?
There's just one about a contact telephone number for Rego, because the number they have has been cutting off. I don't know if we've got an up-to-date phone number for them.
So on the initial website, which I linked at the very beginning, there is a so on the initial website where you go to find all the Rego resources, there should be a set of phone numbers for support there. So let me just see if I can get the slide back up. So here, if you click on the user guide, I believe they've updated their info. If that fails, I mean, we can pass it on to the Rego team if their phone number's cutting out. Another way of receiving help is you can actually do live chat with them a lot of the time, which is on the right side of the browser window. I've used it a couple of times and it does work. And even if there's no one actively on the live chat, it'll let you leave a message and then they try to phone you back. So do use that if you can. And then obviously there's a support email that I linked in the presentation as well. So do email them on the support email if you're having specific problems. Any other questions? No? Okay, great. So thank you all for coming, and the main thing is that the developments coming up in the next few months hopefully will make this better and a better experience for all of you. But any feedback, let me know. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, Alex. Bye.
Bye.